3 months ago, I retired from the best job in the world. I was a paediatric surgeon based at the Children's Hospital just about a mile down the road from where we are today. And the mainstay of my work was performing complex surgery on newborn babies. The job obviously required an attention to detail as well as fine-tuned hand-eye coordination. I think that's a given. But much more than that, it required a passion to be at my best pretty much every time I scrubbed up in the operating room. And that's exactly what you would have expected from me if it was your newborn baby that I was operating on. But even beyond that, it required the compassion to deal with the most vulnerable in our society. Babies like David, who was born almost 4 months prematurely, he weighed less than 1.5 pounds. That's about 1/5 of the size of a normal, healthy, full-term baby. And I'm sure you can imagine that the intricacies involved in keeping babies born at these extremes of prematurity alive is just quite incredible. But it also just so happened that David was born with a really complex anatomical problem on his insides that without major surgery, he wouldn't survive any more than a couple of days. And the risks involved in performing surgery on a baby who was quite literally the size of my hand from his head down to his toes, the risks were enormous. And to give his parents great credit, they accepted the risks. And their only expectation was that as a team that we would turn up with our A game. And we did. And this is David when he was 18 months of age. And this is him celebrating his 21st birthday. And it has been the most unbelievable privilege and a joy to have been able to do all of this work for more than 3 decades. But of course, this notion of job satisfaction isn't new. If you go right back to the days of Aristotle when he said that pleasure in the job puts perfection in the work. And indeed, our modern day psychologists tell us that no matter what it is you and I do for a living, 1/4 of your success is down to your intellect and 3/4 of your success is down to your attitude. In other words, your emotional intelligence or your EQ trumps your IQ. And those same psychologists tell me that doctors just like me are significantly faster and more accurate at making a diagnosis if we enjoy the work that we do. And I call this additional edge, this professional edge that it has given me and many others, I call it the joy factor. But this joy factor isn't just based on psychology alone. It's grounded in neuroscience. So whenever you're really enjoying whatever it is you do for a living, dopamine rises in your brain. Dopamine's your get up and go hormone. Serotonin, your happy hormone, rises in your brain, particularly in an area of the brain called the amygdala. That's your emotional epicenter. And my favorite brain hormone, oxytocin. Now, some of you will know oxytocin perhaps as the love hormone. And that's maybe a step too far in the office, but small increases in oxytocin in your brain, they make you a better team player because you want to collaborate more effectively with those around you. But all of this psychology stuff and the neuroscience is maybe a wee bit highbrow, but the question is, how do we turn that into something tangible that you can take into your own place of work? How can I use the fact that I really enjoyed the career that I've had to be a force of motivation for a new generation of medics, particularly in this part of the world when the NHS is on its knees, the worst waiting lists in the UK, and when today, in this city, doctors are taking industrial action? Well, I learned a really important lesson quite a number of years ago. As well as being a surgeon, I was also an educator, a senior lecturer at Queen's University. And my job was to teach medical students and trainee pediatricians and surgeons about surgical diseases of childhood. And I became concerned that the academic stuff that we were offering these students, it was quite dry, it was bland, there was nothing particularly inspiration about it. It was lists of differential diagnoses and clinical algorithms. And I just asked the question, why can't we add a bit of spice, a bit of pizzazz, add a bit of color to the stuff that we're offering these students? And in a subject matter as serious as medicine and surgery, could we, even dare we, inject a wee bit of Craic? And that would be CRAIC. Just putting it out there, okay? So let me go back to Aristotle just for a moment, because as well as being a scholar, a philosopher, an astronomer, by all counts, Aristotle was also a brilliant orator, and whenever he delivered an oration to his audience, he would captivate his audience by using three principles. First of all, he would build the characters within the story that he was telling. Secondly, he would build a drama, but not only would he build a drama, he would bring his audience right into the middle of the drama. And then finally, there would be some major climactic event. It might be tragedy or it might be joy. But whatever the finale was, his audience was totally gripped and they would want to come back for more. So let me just park Aristotle for a moment. And I want you just to briefly take on board this list, because this is a real case. This is a case study about a baby who was born with a really complex problem, life-threatening problem. And this is the kind of information that we would have shared with students back in the day. And essentially what I would have been saying to the students: memorize the list, regurgitate the list, pass your exams, Bob's your uncle, but it's hardly motivational, is it? But what if we take the same information in the list and we give it the Aristotle treatment and we turn it into something much more live and imaginative? And this is a true story, and this is exactly how this story panned out on the day that this baby was born. It happened to be a Sunday afternoon. It was 4 o'clock on the Sunday afternoon, actually. I was the surgeon on call, and I'd had a mare of a week. But in a moment of quiet and calm, I was enjoying a cup of coffee and flicking through the Sunday papers, and my phone rang, and I instantly recognized the person on the other end of the phone, and it was a senior pediatrician from a large teaching hospital about 70 miles from Belfast. And the opening line of the conversation went exactly like this: "Hi, Bill, Neil here from Elton. I'm hoping you can help me with a geopolitical problem." It's true. Well, I'm a reasonably smart bloke, but I know nothing about geopolitics. So I said, "Okay, Neil, tell me the story." So he began to tell me the story about a young woman. She was in her late 20s. She was pregnant with twins, and she lived in County Donegal, open brackets, in the Republic of Ireland, close brackets. And she went into labour, and she and her husband crossed the border into Derry, Londonderry, open brackets, in Northern Ireland, close brackets. And she delivered 2 beautiful, identical twin boys. And I want you now to picture the scene, a loving family scene with a young couple embracing as mum is nursing her beautiful twin boys, breast is best. And then a few seconds later, baby James chokes, goes blue, stops breathing, and has a cardiac arrest. And in those few seconds, we've gone from a scene of family bliss and tranquility into pandemonium as the midwife slams the red emergency button on the wall. And a few seconds later, the pediatric resus team come crashing into the delivery suite, and they magnificently bring baby James back to life. And the baby now has drips up and he has tubes down. And when I'm delivering this new lecture in the new form to the students, I will show them, the students, the x-rays that the pediatricians have taken. And I now invite my student audience to become fully immersed into the drama that's unfolding. When I say invite, it goes something like this: what steps did you take to revive baby James? What do these x-rays show? What's your working diagnosis? And have you got a management plan? And if you don't, if you muck it up, this baby won't survive. No pressure. But of course, the students get it right because they're a smart lot. And they work out that baby James was born with a piece of his esophagus or swallowing pipe missing. The top end was blind ending. The bottom end was plumbed directly into his windpipe or trachea. 2 other major airway anomalies, and this baby was literally drowning in his own secretions. And we know that babies born with this combination of abnormalities, 100% of the babies die unless they undergo major reconstruction surgery ASAP. But what about the geopolitic, I hear you ask? Well, because the family came from County Donegal, strictly speaking, baby James should have been transferred to the Children's Hospital in Dublin for emergency surgery, but the paediatricians didn't think that he would survive the journey on the rocky road to Dublin. So they asked if I would become involved, and of course, the answer was yes. So high drama, blue lights down the Glenshane Pass, and an hour and 20 minutes later, the baby is now being stabilized by the magnificent team in the Children's Hospital Paediatric Intensive Care Unit. And then into my domain in the operating theatre, and 4 hours of reconstructing the esophagus and doing various bits of plumbing. And 2 days later, James is reunited with his twin brother, Niall. I hear you say, oh. Well, that was 25 years ago. And I recently met up with the boys again in Donegal. And just for the avoidance of doubt, I'm the one in the middle. And because I had reconstructed James's esophagus when he was 1 day of age, it was incumbent upon me to ensure that his esophagus was working satisfactorily. And I can assure you that it just was. And because advertising is not permitted in a TED Talk, other beverages are available. But why go to these extraordinary lengths to get a message across? Well, when I asked you to briefly read that list a few moments ago, you will have engaged your prefrontal cortex, that's the intellectual part of your brain, and you probably won't have engaged much else. But if you take the same information and you build it into a story, a vibrant story, and particularly if you feel invested and part of the drama within the story, multiple areas of your brain light up. Your visual cortex lights up, your auditory center where you're hearing sounds and you're experiencing the drama. And very importantly, an area of your brain called the hippocampus, that's your brain's long-term memory bank. It glows like a Christmas tree, which is very good for students because it's committing all of this memory into all of this detail into your long-term memory. But the question is, does this method of information and data sharing, does it resonate with industries outside my own in medicine or surgery? Well, apparently it does, because according to the American venture capitalist, a guy called Ben Horowitz, who's responsible for a fund approaching $100 billion, he's quoted as saying the most underrated skill in any business is storytelling. And to Richard Branson, entrepreneurs who cannot tell a story will never be successful. So my parting thoughts to you today are, go back into your place of work, motivate those around you by telling them your story. And if you've really enjoyed the work that you've done and the career that you've had, use your joy factor to empower those around you. And most importantly, have a bit of crack. Thank you.